Daisy Collingridge. My work generally sits around the body, creating figurative sculptures. For the British Textile Biennial, we were tasked to investigate the global nature of textiles and the relationships between people and cloth, both past and present. The fashion industry is problematic, particularly the fast fashion industry. I wanted to use this opportunity to delve further into that, and I fell down a dark rabbit hole. Jenny is not a puppet is simultaneously suggesting that we as individuals can be change makers in the way we consume clothes, and yet also acknowledges that these big global problems can be overwhelming at times, and there is never a simple fix. For this project, I wanted to challenge myself to use as little new materials as possible. Jenny is made from unwanted jeans and the leftover food insulation packaging. The wood is also scrap. The only new materials are the wire and the thread. Working with denim is challenging. It has very little stretch and is much thicker than my usual material of choice. I had to adapt the technique slightly. Jenny is also at a different scale than previous works, so there was a change in construction. Unlike wearables, Jenny has grown onto the structure, but I felt it was important that she was puppet-sized for the message behind the work.
Hi, I'm Debbie Liddon and I'm an artist living on the North Norfolk coast. I'm interested in how we perceive our surroundings using all of our senses, and the piece I've made for the British Textile Biennial responds to this by looking at the conditions experienced by workers in the global textile industry. I've explored one set of circumstances experienced by textile workers in Lancashire textile mills during the Industrial Revolution. My inspiration came from a visit to Quarrybank Mill in Style, where I experienced the deafening noise of the mill machinery. I made a recording of the working looms, and these recordings have formed the basis for the work. In 19th century cotton mills, the mainly female workforce laboured in an environment of unrelenting mechanical sound, and the overwhelming sensory experience was of cold and of noise. The workers wore wooden-soled shoes to keep their feet dry in the damp conditions that were required for processing cotton, and they would tap their feet in time to the rhythm of the machines to keep warm and to keep their spirits up. Their wooden-soled feet mimicked the sounds of the machinery, and complex, intricate steps evolved that were the beginnings of clog dancing. I've interpreted my recording of the running looms to make belt. It's a type of score that visualises and notates the continuous recurring rhythms made by the moving parts of textile machines. Its form is inspired by the infinite looping of belts that drove the machinery in textile sheds, and it notates 3 of the rhythms from my recordings. The eyelets that mark the sounds punch out the rhythms in a never-ending moto perpetuo that reminds me of all the textile workers labouring in constant motion somewhere in the world, both in the present and in the past.
My name is Emily Jo Gibbs. I'm an artist and a maker. I live and work in South East London. My work is constructed from a layered collage and a pliqué of silk organza pieces that are hand-stitched onto a linen base. Silk organza is a translucent fabric, and I particularly like the crisp, flat, dull qualities of the material that is woven in India and in China. I use a stab stitch action, which is slow but very accurate, and I really like the way that the stitches lie on the surface of the work. I'm interested in making work about people who make things, shining a light on them and celebrating their skill, dexterity and material knowledge. For the Textile Biennial, I have made a portrait of one of the Chinese mill workers who makes the silk organza that I use, and that has become synonymous with my work. I wish I knew a little about her, but she remains quite anonymous, leading me to reflect upon our cultural differences, economic power, the protection of data and trade secrets, and to really wonder about her life.
I am Esther Bornemisa, a fiber artist based in Budapest, Hungary. I work mainly with recycled paper, textiles and other soft materials. My main working methods are dyeing, printing and machine stitching. My piece for the British Textile Biennial resulted from my research in the archives of the former local textile mill, the Goldberger factory. It started in the late 1700s as a small blueprinting workshop and grew into one of the biggest factories in Budapest. Through the research, I got most fascinated with the collection of sample books. As all the printed samples, even the spoiled ones, have been saved from the beginning, the collection seemed to be a resume of the history of fabric printing. This idea prompted me to think about my own experimental fabric printing and dig into my saved samples and leftover prints. Moreover, many years ago I got hold of a discarded jacquard loom card from the mill that served as a base for creating my personal sample collection. The fact that the jacquard cards were chained up in a loop for repeating the pattern reminded me of my own working process. I like using recycled materials and work with minimal waste, so I often save even the smallest bits from a piece to use them later in another one along with making new prints. I fused my samples on both sides of the cards, stitched individual frames around them with dyed self-waxed raw cotton yarn, and connected them with loose running stitch. For hanging the installation, the cards needed to be reinforced with thin carbon fiber rods, and I used strong weft yarn for the final compilation.
Hello, my name's Hannah Lamb and I'm an artist based near Bradford, West Yorkshire. The work that I've created for the exhibition is called Incomplete Histories, and it takes inspiration from my research in the Bradford College Textile Archive, where I was looking at 19th century printers and dyers' notebooks, a lot of which relate to Lancashire's textile industries. They're really fascinating and very beautiful books that record the work of dye chemists as they concocted recipes to make the beautiful colours and patterns for fashionable fabrics of the day. And I was really interested in researching the origins of the materials and the dye stuffs that are mentioned in the books and where they'd come from in the world. And I think that reflects our colonial past and the global connections that are ever present in the textile industries. So I've translated that into my own work, recreating aspects of the dye notebooks in cloth form and thinking about the way that we tell stories about our industrial past. I've experimented with techniques that allow me to deconstruct materials. I've used devore to break down the fibres of fabric, and I've also used cyanotype blueprinting as a way of creating traces of textile fragments on the pages. I'm also really happy with the splashes and brush marks that kind of remind me of the marks left in the old dye recipe books, the drips and things. And I think they also remind you of the fact that historical narratives can be very fluid and changing.
Hello, I'm Hazel Bruce and I've lived and worked in Belfast for 30 years, but I'm originally from Leeds. I've been a member of the 62 group since the early 90s and I teach textile art at Ulster University. Irish Sampler was made towards the end of an intensive year of teaching on campus under COVID restrictions. Responding to the British Textile Biennale brief, I reflected on the Ulster linen industry, specifically white work embroidery made on industrial machines by thousands of girls and young women during the turn of the 19th century, and the connection to teaching my students to use the same fast industrial machines. Perseverance is essential if precision is required, but these machines offer huge possibilities in expressive mark making. So this piece is about the endless, unself-conscious throwaway samples made when showing people how to use the Irish. Finding time to keep going, to sit down at a machine and play, has resulted in a piece that makes sense to me in this strange and unfocused year of stops and starts. I had time to think and honour the women and girls who spent their lives embroidering linen then and now, as artists or as workers in industry. The red and white Ulster quilts inspired the colour, and the piece was worked on a traditional embroidered linen cloth. I'm adding a different kind of embroidery to it. I'm working freely, following no pattern, making marks, searching, persevering, learning and reflecting on where we are now.
My name's Isabel Curry. I'm an embroidery artist based in Greater Manchester. My interest is in exploring stitches in a three-dimensional way. Stitching in space can be a challenge. It requires a lot of different processes, many of which are not normally associated with embroidery. And in order to achieve a precise high-quality result, a lot of advanced planning is needed. The inspiration for this work came from the observation that the textiles industry has evolved to encircle the whole world as fibres travel from country to country at different stages of their life cycle. I wanted to depict this accumulation of repeated connections and interactions and the way that they build up into a global network. The colours used in this piece have been chosen to reflect the impact that climate has had on the textile industry. This is particularly relevant here in Manchester, where a rainy climate formed rivers that drove the watermills to power the innovative new machinery that was so important to the textiles industrial revolution. I'm Kay Smith and I'm based in Suffolk. My piece of work for the British Textile Biennial is called Where Have All the Workers Gone and is inspired by my interest in weaving, the process of creating a fabric through the interweaving of threads, a warp and a weft on a loom. Some cultures believe that weaving and language evolved together and compare written text to a piece of woven cloth. So you have an image of the weaver singing or speaking as he throws the shuttle, and the sound of his voice is woven or written into the resultant fabric. In Peru, all the parts of the loom and the tools that you need to weave relate to the body. So for example, the central panel of fabric is called chima, which means heart, and learning to spin and weave are connected to various rites of passage for the females of the community. In Greek mythology, the strong upright warp thread represents the masculine, whilst the gentle supple weft, which has to bend around the warp threads, represent the feminine. Where Have All the Workers Gone is made by repetitively stitching over a series of old metal heddles. Heddles sit on shafts at the heart of the loom. Each warp thread is threaded through a heddle, and the shafts are then raised and lowered in various sequences in order to create different structures of cloth. The heddles clatter and chatter as they move with a regular beating and pulsating of the beater, pushing each weft thread into place. As a student in Carlisle, I worked at a small, family-run woolen mill where I came into contact with many ex-employees of the weaving industry. They all spoke with real passion for the industry and with genuine sadness at its demise. As the textile industry changed and gradually disappeared, once thriving communities became ghost towns. Mills were at the heart of towns, providing livelihoods for people and creating vital communities. They were filled with the noise and the bustle and the voices of the machines and the workers. The heddles in Where Have All the Workers Gone can no longer work. Like the once busy mills, they are now still and silent reminders of a once thriving industry.
Hi, I'm Maggie Henton. I'm interested in the construction of place, in how we live, occupy spaces and make places, and conversely in how places make us, issues that have been brought to the forefront of our thinking over the last 18 months. For the British Textile Biennale, I focused on the early beginnings of global textile trade in the 17th and 18th centuries and the rise of the East India Company. With lockdown constraining my ability to travel, my working methods focused on reading and internet-based research into mill buildings, chintz production and the rise of a global trade. I found myself asking how best to express the legacy of this trade within an artwork. The title of my piece, Bloodlines, suggests blood as a symbol of life and of death, the lines of bloodshed and labour along the trade routes, and also the lines that mark out the ties which link us together, our common humanity. The lot of the cotton mill worker in Lancashire, the weavers and dyers of the Indian subcontinent, and cotton pickers from around the world may seem very different, but all are linked by global trade. A trade that both divides and alienates us, but also ties us together. And surely if we have learned anything recently, it is that we are all part of one planet and that we are tied inextricably together. The subtitle of the work, Ghosts of Empire, refers to the complex, layered reminders of the cotton textile trade that are scattered across our landscapes. We are haunted by the ghosts of empire, even if we would like to ignore or deny them. Old mill buildings and their chimneys are a constant reminder of past manifestations of this trade. Their shadows haunt the landscapes of Lancashire. In the work, shadow figures of mill workers and of cotton pickers return the human presence. The double-sided nature of the work both separates and links. On one side, Lancashire mills, and on the reverse, the Indian subcontinent and the production of chintz.
I'm Paddy Killer and I live in the northeast of England. I'm originally from West Yorkshire, where all my family worked in the textile industry. In the mid-1980s I had bought a pair of Peter Reid sheets and they were very precious to me, so I decided to use them as a starting point for my piece of work for the British Textile Biennial. I began researching the Reid family. I found out that there were two families, the Reids and the Moorbys. They started in competition but then joined forces. The mill they stayed in longest was Springbank Mill in Nelson. I decided to make some little pillowcases. One with a map of Pendle and the mills on it, another of Springbank Mill with people coming out of the works, and one of the residences. I printed out a life-size cartoon. I used it as a template to draw through with pencil onto the fabric of the sheet. Then I start to draw with the technical drawing pens. After the drawings were finished, I then had to make up the pillows. The last thing to do was to machine around the edges to make it look as if it was a 2-cord Peter Reid fine bed linen. One day I hope to visit Nelson and visit the Manchester Road area to see the beautiful houses they lived in, and especially Spring Cottage, which is currently being renovated as a mosque.
For this year's British Textile Biennial, I've created 2 new works. The first of which, A Portrait of Coal, is a series of images, really, which portraits a material which has become so much a part of our life and our history. It highlights the aesthetic quality of the material, the cultural, but also brings to the surface the climate impact of this material. Coal was more than just a material, but really a symbol of power, of class, and of time. And the unlocking of this geological time gave us the power to go fast, to go beyond the means of our own human production. In Britain, it is a symbol of the past, but ultimately, coal is actually a symbol of the present, of the future, and the climate emergency. The second work, Coal Seams, maps the hidden underground landscapes of this elemental material formed over 300 million years ago. And through my research, it brings a story of race and class to the surface. It examines my own family connection to material and place, and how, like the seams that shape a garment, coal continues to shape our lives.
Hi, my name's Sally Spinks and I'm an artist and designer based in South East London. For this exhibition, I was really keen to explore flock and its place in the global story of textiles. And I'm particularly interested because it's possibly one of the oldest reuse and recycle processes where small waste fibres are glued to different types of material. Invented in China around 3,000 years ago and mechanised in medieval Europe, flock has had many incarnations around the world, and it's still with us today. It's often used as an affordable symbol of luxury and grandeur. So, for example, wallpaper for 17th century middle classes, or by Indian restaurants in the 1970s. And more recently, a kitsch revival has seen flock on anything from pug dog figures to cars to bling wallpaper. Using a hand tufting technique to replicate flock, my aim was to enhance its sumptuousness and decadence, pushing even further the aspirations of previous generations and cultures, while at the same time exploring its reuse and recycle credentials. In making this hand-tufted flock, I've now got 4 bin bags of tiny wool fibres that can be used to flock anything. Reuse, recycle, the beauty and grandeur of flock.
I'm Sue Stone, an artist based in North East Lincolnshire. I use hand and machine embroidery, sometimes combined with applique and acrylic paint to create narratives. The work I've made for the British Textile Biennial documents the lifespan of a small lifestyle clothing brand called Anywhere, which was owned and run by myself and my husband Dave from 1975 to 2002. We designed, manufactured and retailed women's wear from an Edwardian shop premises in Grimsby. My work included designing, pattern drafting, cutting and overseeing the sample making and finishing. In the early days we made one-off designs and the cloth was woven in Colne. But as the Lancashire cotton industry declined, good quality fabrics became more difficult to source, and Sundays were spent travelling cross-country to Manchester to choose bolts of cloth that now travelled from far and wide. There were many ups and downs during its lifespan, but on reflection the ups outweighed the downs, and it was a sad time when Anywhere finally closed its doors in April 2002.
Teresa Whitfield, British artist living on the south coast of England, and I create true-to-life ink drawings of lace and lace garments from museums in the UK and France. Whilst researching the textile collection at Gawthorpe Hall in Lancashire, I came across an exquisite black lace fingerless glove, and as soon as I saw it I knew that was the piece I wanted to draw. The mitten dates from the late 18th century and is made from a very fine Brussels lace in black silk. Although visibly damaged, particularly in parts of the netting which surrounds the floral motifs, it's a beautiful, very high quality example of Brussels handmade lace and includes an unusual variety of different patterns in its design. I've been interested in the idea of my drawings being a means of conserving or repairing damaged lace since a drawing I completed in 2011 of a bonnet veil from the Bronte Parsonage Museum, in which I deliberately ignored the quite considerable damaged areas, drawing the veil in its complete pre-damaged state, thus returning it to the original condition in which it would have been worn by Charlotte Bronte. The idea of not only repairing the damage to the mitten, but also replacing the missing corresponding mitten came to me as soon as I first saw the piece, and was a real motivating factor behind my decision to do the drawing, which in total took a month to complete. A much prized and valued part of the collection, in 2019 the single mitten of black Brussels silk lace was selected as part of Gawthorpe Hall's collection in 60 objects, which celebrated the 60th anniversary of the foundation of this internationally renowned archive of global textiles by Rachel K. Shuttleworth. After the British Textile Biennial exhibition at the Whitaker, the drawing is going to be transferred to Gawthorpe Hall, where it will be exhibited next to the original surviving mitten.
My name is Vanessa Rolfe. I'm an artist based in Hampshire. The work I have made for the British Textile Biennial is called Trade Winds. In this piece, I have reused torn and worn textiles that have been dyed with natural indigo, pieced and quilted. I employed these labour-intensive processes to question how we value those workers involved in the growing, production and dyeing of cotton, and the material worth of these products. Using utilitarian tailor's tacking stitch to secure the layers of fabric and wadding, I have tracked the currents and winds mapped by Edmund Healy in 1686. These routes dictated the movement of maritime traffic around the globe and led to the expansion of colonial European empires. I'm continuing to learn about how cotton growing, textile dyeing and garment production are interconnected in our global histories, and to this day exploit people, communities and the environment. Trade Winds reflects that although these routes no longer dictate global commerce, the colonial structures they built continue to shape the modern political geography of our world.